this comeback kind of had it all, and it touched so many different players on the team, sort of having their moments and making plays when they needed to. Nick, KU closed this thing out. If you count Trey White as a guard, they closed this thing out with a 4-guard lineup around Flory, with the 3 guards being Melvin Council, okay, Jamari McDowell, and Elmarco Jackson.
Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. Of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Enterprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. You know who should pay heed is Jamie Dixon and TCU after the performance we saw from Kansas on Tuesday nights. We're going to break it all down, share some of our reaction to it, look a little bit ahead to the weekend when Kansas goes to West Virginia, and more. We'll also be talking plenty more of KU football transfer portal news coming up later this week, so be on the lookout for that. We broke down a ton of KU's incoming transfers earlier in the week on one of our previous shows, so I would encourage you to check that out. And then we'll talk more about some of the newer commits coming up later on in the week. Of course, the portal, it's a fluid process. Things happen, and in fact, right after we recorded our previous portal update, a guy committed pretty quickly there after we finished recording. So those things happen. We'll talk about that guy on the next show. But crazy times on the KU football side, so be sure to follow along there on the transfer portal and all the guys that Kansas is getting via the portal. Like I said, we'll touch on all that coming up in future shows, and again, check out our previous show as well. As for this show, again, reaction to Kansas beating TCU at Allen Fieldhouse, 104-100 in overtime, in truly one of the more remarkable games in Allen Fieldhouse history, I think. There was many, many different storylines, many, many different boneheaded plays, many, many different bizarre plays. TCU throws the ball out of bounds in regulation that gives KU a chance to win. They foul Darryn Peterson that gives them a chance even to tie. They had the play where the guy dropped it out of bounds. Marco Jackson throws it away out of bounds and Darryn Peterson's not looking. Just an unbelievable game. And Kansas obviously was down 15 at one point with like 5 minutes left in the game. Comes back to win. Truly an Allen Fieldhouse classic. And most importantly, and this is where I'll start the show, Kevin, before I kick it to you, is my immediate thought was, you don't apologize for defending home court.
No, absolutely. And it's funny. I mean, we'll get to Darryn Peterson, the defense, all of the different things about this game, Nick. But the main thing that I wanted to touch on is, if you haven't been to Allen Fieldhouse when there's a comeback like this, like, there's really not a whole lot like it. And the team's not playing well. You're down by a lot. And the way the fans just kind of will the team back into the game. I'll never forget, Nick, the year after Georgia Tech knocked Kansas out of the NCAA tournament. Kansas hosts Georgia Tech at Allen Fieldhouse. Georgia Tech goes up huge, leads almost that entire game. And it's like KU would cut the score to like 14, and the fans would start getting, kind of a little bit excited. And you're like, it's a 14-point game, but, it's still a bucket or two closer than it was just a minute ago. And then it gets to 11, and it rises up another level. Once you get that thing into single digits, I mean, the pressure on opposing teams is palpable. You can reach out and touch it pretty much. And so there is a certain magic at Allen Fieldhouse, especially in those great comebacks, that I think everybody needs to experience, because you just come away shaking your head saying, I can't believe I just watched that. But it's one of the true sort of, marriages that you can see in sports between a fan base really trying to uplift the team and get them to play better than they have been playing, and the team sort of receiving that and responding to it. And last night, like you said, an all-time Allen Fieldhouse classic. Was a weird game. It had a lot of different things going on. Kansas didn't play well for 35 minutes, as Bill Self said afterwards. But for the final 10 or so, Kansas played with its hair on fire. The crowd was terrific, and the Jayhawks wind up getting a win. And at the end of the year, nobody's going to take a win away from KU and say, oh, well, they shouldn't have won that one, against TCU. No, it counts as a win all the same. Like you said, never apologize for defending your home court, however you get there.
Well, and it's so funny, during the broadcast, it was brought up a couple times, I think, by Bajan Chiambi, if you're watching the broadcast, where he said, TCU didn't have a single player on the roster that had ever previously played at Allen Fieldhouse, right?
Yeah.
And for the first 35 minutes of the game, you could see some of the benefit of that, almost of the naivete of, not knowing really, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And they were playing confident. They were playing comfortably. KU was obviously playing poorly, and that contributed to it as well. And TCU was up. And then you see the complete inverse of that in the final 5 minutes in overtime, where TCU just became completely shell-shocked, right? And had absolutely no answer for what KU was doing, both on the court and in the stands with the fans. And a huge credit to those fans, right? Because, it's KU's down 15 with 5 minutes left. Like, you could have easily justified saying, all right, this one's done, put a fork in it, get to the parking lot, get out of there, get home quicker. Nobody did that, right? And obviously very happy they didn't, because Kansas needed almost 16,000 of them, I think, to get them back into the game. But yeah, so huge tip of the cap to the fans for what they did, because yeah, I mean, it's so funny. There's a coach, I think it was it Lon Kruger, Kevin, that once said that the hardest part about playing out at Allen Fieldhouse is that you have to play against Kansas, like, on the court.
Yeah.
And I think there is some truth to that, obviously, but last night we saw the impact of what the fans can have and what the actual building itself can have. And we've seen that over a number of games over the course of its history, but it was on even more display, I think, last night than what we've seen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it was funny, the 3-pointer that Jamari McDowell hit, that was a big shot. You can kind of see some fans starting to leak out, as he hits the shot. And I'm not trying to shame anybody. Actually, I got messages from a few friends this morning saying, hey, I didn't watch the end of the game. I turned it off when it was, when you're down 15 with under 5 minutes left to go. And there's just something about that Allen Fieldhouse magic. I think you tweeted out, Nick, like, hey, if KU can get to this point, I'll be sitting up in my chair. And I was in a similar spot here at my house, where I was kind of like, I'm not saying they can't get it done, but they need to hit basically these thresholds, or these, sort of pinpricks along the way of the comeback, to make me think this thing's going to happen. For a while it was, hey, get this thing into single digits and TCU's going to start to feel the pressure a little bit. Then it was get it to 6, where it's a 2-possession game, and you really can feel some of that stuff. And then at the end, you want a shot, and you wind up getting into that position where, you're down 3, you wind up getting a stop. Basically, Darryn Peterson does the Undertaker meme where he sits up, and winds up going in, gets the 3 free throws, and then you wind up actually having a shot for the win right after that. And so I think it was one where I don't know that I was ever going to turn it off per se, but I was definitely in the spot where I was like, okay, I'll start, sort of really paying attention if this happens. And it happened. Okay, I'll start to, really think this is possible if this happens. And it happened. And then they wound up going into overtime. TCU hung around in overtime. Credit to them. We've seen games like this where the team that pushes it to overtime winds up kind of getting crunched in overtime. They responded pretty well in overtime and really battled in overtime, but ultimately Kansas was able to pull that thing out.
Yeah, one of the crazier things actually about TCU, that you mentioned overtime, is, Kevin, they had like 4 straight threes to keep the pressure on Kansas. I mean, Kansas got it. It was like a 5-point lead with not much time left, and TCU just kept hitting threes.
Yeah.
And it was a little worrisome there towards the end.
Some of them were tough shots. I mean,
yeah,
TCU's threes overall this game, a lot of them were, and we'll get to the defense, a lot of them were warm-up jumpers where you're just stepping in rhythm and whatever else, but they hit some pretty difficult 3-pointers to hang around in that one. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, but before we dive into the game specifically and talk about kind of the ups and downs of it and everything and some of our broader takeaways, the other question I had, and a lot of people I think are making a similar comparison, is you look back to 2017 Kansas against West Virginia at Allen Fieldhouse and what type of comeback that was. Somebody even tweeted at us in our mentions on Twitter and asked basically straight up, which one's better, this or 2017 West Virginia?
I think it was probably this one, And the reason I would say that is that team that came back against West Virginia, you knew that team could bomb from deep. And so there was a chance that, hey, Devontae is going to hit a few shots and this thing is going to be really close. With this team, one, you didn't think they could get enough stops to get there, right? I mean, when you're sitting there, you're thinking there's no way with the way TCU is scoring against this KU defense, they just aren't going to get enough stops to be able to make up ground. And then when you look at them and you say, oh, there's not enough offense to be able to make up a 15-point deficit with, 438 or whatever it was. And so it was a better comeback in that I think it was harder to see. Whereas the West Virginia one was kind of like, man, Devontae hits a couple shots, Frank hits a shot or two, you're right there. And so I think that's a little bit of the difference is that team was a better team. I think the 2017 team. And in this one, it was just sort of, there was no reason for them to be able to flip the momentum the way that they did with how poorly they were playing. And yet they did it anyway. And I think that probably gives this game a little bit of an edge to me.
Yeah, that's where I landed. If you're defining better comeback as which was more improbable, this one was definitely, sure. Right? For the reasons that you outlined, which is you didn't know if this team had it in them, right? You didn't know if they could A, score, or B, get enough stops. The 2017 comeback was fantastic, obviously, right? But that team with Devontae and Frank, and even, those couple of years of those guys together, you felt like they could do that on any given night, right? You felt like no matter what the score was, if you're within, 9-15 with 2 or 3 minutes left, okay, hit a couple threes, and then all of a sudden it's a completely different game, right? You felt like that was a possibility.
Yep.
I'm sure many, many people, myself included, and maybe you too, Kevin, thought that this game last night against TCU was over at various moments, right? Whether it was when you're down 15 with 4 minutes left, whether it was when you're down 9 and you get the ball back and Marco chucks it into the first row because Darryn Peterson's trying to sub out of the game. At whatever moment, I'm sure many fans thought this one is done. This one is completely over. There is no chance KU comes back. And then obviously they did, right? Yeah. So in terms of the better comeback, if you wanted to use the term better to say which is more improbable, yeah, the one against TCU we just saw was more improbable. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Now, in terms of skill or shot making, whatever it may be, the West Virginia comeback may be better in your mind because again, that was just simply Devontae single-handedly hitting a couple threes, getting Kansas on the comeback rolling, right? So I guess that's probably kind of the way that I would look at it is last night against TCU was more improbable. I don't think there's any question about that because you didn't know, right? And obviously you want to look at some examples. Kevin, we've seen I shouldn't say this Kansas team specifically, but Kansas over the past couple seasons in similar situations and they lose by 15 or they lose by 23 like they actually did against TCU in 2023.
Sure. So
we've seen some examples of more recent iterations of Kansas not be able to do that. And then you have what happened on Tuesday night where they do get it done and find a way to make it happen. Darryn Peterson puts on the superhero cape for 15 seconds while dealing with the cramps. Melvin Council obviously does his thing. Trey White, Floyd Bedung ends up getting going later in the game. It was a collective team effort on top of, again, some comically bad mistakes by TCU and real supervillain slipping on a banana peel moments, I think, from TCU as well down the stretch of that game. But in the end, yeah, this one was more improbable. And therefore, I think if you're using that definition, it was better.
Yeah, I mean, you have Marco Jackson getting 5 steals, as part of the comeback. And Bill Self said after the game that he thought Marco was kind of the MVP of the game. And I get Darryn Peterson at 32 and 32. We'll talk more about Darryn Peterson, I'm sure. But the Marco thing was huge in that it was so out of character, not necessarily that, hey, he was getting steals, but without those steals, KU was not getting stops on TCU. It just wasn't happening. TCU was getting good look after good look after good look after good look. And so from that standpoint where you say, if you take the ball away before they can shoot it, that's the only way we're going to stop these guys. And he winds up with 5 steals, obviously winds up with a big one in overtime off the inbounds pass as well that winds up giving KU a little bit of breathing room. Yeah, it's easy to see that El Marco played a major role, but you look at that, you look at the big shot hit by Jamari McDowell, the big free throws by Jamari McDowell late again, and you say this comeback kind of had it all, and it touched so many different players on the team sort of having their moments and making plays when they needed to. Nick, KU closed this thing out. If you count Trey White as a guard, they closed this thing out with a 4-guard lineup around Flory, with the 3 guards being Melvin Council, okay, Jamari McDowell, and Elmarco Jackson. And that was the lineup for the entirety of overtime. No subs. It was those 5 that won that game. And so when you look at not just the comeback part of it, but also the, hey, these are the guys closing the game out for you against a pretty good opponent, because I do think people are underrating TCU a little bit. That made it all the more special too, and some cool moments for guys who have stuck around at KU when maybe it wasn't the most popular, thing for them to do so.
Yeah, I'm sure, myself included, a lot of KU fans probably looked at TCU and said, well, these guys lost to New Orleans, so they must be bad, right?
Yeah.
Well, after the loss to New Orleans, all they did was beat Florida, the defending national champions. They pushed Michigan more than probably anybody has pushed Michigan since then, I guess, besides
it was a 2-point game in the final minute against Michigan. So, I mean, they were right there. And Michigan's killing people. I mean,
yes,
they are just flat destroying everybody. Did you see the thing that came out where one of the gambling websites or whatever said that Michigan would be like a 5-point favorite against 2012 Kentucky right now?
Really? I did not see that.
Like, that's how much Michigan is crushing people by, and TCU gave Michigan everything that they could handle. That, by the way, that loss to Michigan after the opener, which TCU was missing one of their key guys in the opener. I can't remember which guy it was.
Yeah.
But I remember looking at that. Since that game, the Michigan game's the only one they've lost in regulation. They've lost 2 in overtime. And so, yeah, I mean, I think TCU's a little bit better than maybe people are giving them credit for. And by the way, Punch was unbelievable last night. I mean, there was
unstoppable. Yeah,
there was nothing KU could do against him on either end. He was swatting shots all over the place on defense, on offense. He was scoring at will. Punch was, looked very much like a first-team All Big 12 guy last night for sure.
Well, and by the way, the only thing that was slowing him down appeared to be cramping as well.
Yeah,
you had the 2 stars.
That's the Allen Fieldhouse magic, man.
Yeah, you had the 2 stars evidently, having more cramping issues. So, yeah, Kansas wins 104-100 in a crazy game. You don't apologize for winning. You don't apologize for defending home court. But certainly, I think you and I would both agree, Kevin, that if Kansas wants to go anywhere beyond this in terms of the Big 12, the Big 12 tournament, the NCAA tournament, they're going to have to play a lot better. And we'll touch on that. We'll talk a little bit about Darryn Peterson. We'll do all that coming up next. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
My name is Terrell Jolly. A lot of people call me TJ, founder and CEO of Integrity Capital Management. So Integrity Capital Management originally started out as a property management firm, but we slowly transitioned into what is described as an incremental development firm that's focused on situational housing. I know most people say affordable, but we believe in creating housing for people that are actually in need and built to the end user. I believe everyone needs a home, because when you have home, you have hope. The reality is that when you're building a business, one thing you don't think about is like what a true banking relationship means. And, I had the honor and privilege of meeting Debbie early on in my career when I was just trying to get going. And as a small business, it's really challenging at times because people don't understand the concept or not believe the longevity because you're just getting started. But Debbie was willing to take a chance on me, be patient with me. I almost look at it like a grassroots initiative. She's seen and believe what I'm about. Anybody that's really true about their business and want to get some things done, I would definitely trust hands down Enterprise, because Deb's team, along with Aaron and Jackie and all the amazing people that work behind the scenes, even from the treasury side, I would say, hey, give them an opportunity because you won't be disappointed, and you will actually be in hands that actually somebody care and that will see you from start to finish.
This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you've not already, please go ahead and subscribe on our audio platforms. You can find us on Apple and Spotify, at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We'll be doing some more live shows. We didn't have one last night for this game. It ended up obviously being a very, very late evening, as it turned out for Kansas, but we will be live for big KU games. Won't be live on Saturday for West Virginia, but we will be live next Tuesday night, when Kansas takes on Iowa State. You can expect us to be live for immediate post-game shows for some of the bigger games throughout the season for Kansas. And certainly as we get deeper into conference play, February, there's a bunch of big games for Kansas, and obviously the Big 12 tournament, the NCAA tournament, and beyond for KU, potentially, hopefully, a deep run in the NCAA tournament. So the best way to make sure that you know when we're live is to subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can also leave a comment on the video, like the video, and share your thoughts and join in on the conversation. We appreciate those of you that do that. And if you're an audio-only listener, you can leave us a 5-star rating and review as well. That helps us grow the channel also. All right, so Kansas gets the big win, 104-100 in overtime. I spent the first segment a lot just kind of focusing on the big picture of the chaos of the win, getting the win, so on and so forth. Let's talk a little bit more, I think, specifically about kind of how this game unfolded, Kevin, because you mentioned it and Bill Self said it in postgame. For 35-ish minutes, TCU had Kansas in a torture chamber, and KU could not do anything. They couldn't get any stops. TCU was getting open looks left and right. And once again, Kevin, the offense I felt like was really dysfunctional again for KU for a large part of the game. So let's draw a line in the sand. Let's say for the first 35 minutes, forgetting about what happened at the end and Kansas winning the game, what was your thoughts on what transpired basically for the first 35 minutes of this game, where Kansas really struggled, and maybe what KU needs to do to make it to where they don't have that happen for the first 35 minutes of their next game?
Yeah, it could have been even worse, except that KU closed the first half really well and wound up going into halftime with a lead. And I don't know how you felt, Nick, but watching that, I felt like, okay, like KU's woken up. You know, this is going to be a good win. And then in the second half, Kansas just came out and got crushed for those opening 15 minutes. And I think defensively, for the second consecutive game, Kansas's switches really, really got punished. Some of it was lack of communication, where it's, hey, if we're communicating the switch, we're not reacting quickly enough to it, or whatever from a defensive standpoint. And so that was a major problem. I think even beyond that, TCU was able to do some of the things that UCF was able to do in terms of targeting those switches once they were made, in terms of having a smaller guy working against like a Bryson Tiller or somebody like that, or having a bigger guy working on a guard and being able to go to work. And I bring all that up, Nick, to say that Kansas being able to switch was one of the biggest strengths of sort of that first half or so of the season. It was what allowed KU to stay with UConn, was the fact that most teams can't switch with UConn. They get punished in those switches. It didn't happen. That was the only thing that kind of kept Kansas around against UConn. But in the last couple games against the Big 12, the switches haven't been crisp. Even when they've made the proper switches, they've gotten punished by guys working against ideal matchups, either big against a little or a little against big. And I thought one of the things, and you know, we try not to pick on specific guys here. Bryson Tiller is really struggling right now. And I think defensively in particular, I think he was a minus 13 last night. And Nick, I don't know if you knew this or not. He checked out for Darryn Peterson, actually, with 4:38 left to go in the game. And Kansas was down 15. And he didn't come back in, not in the comeback, not in the 5-minute overtime. And so in the 9:38 that they played without Bryson Tiller, basically playing, you know, with Trey White as their 4 over that time period, KU outscored TCU by 19. And so I'm not putting all of that on Bryson Tiller, But I think last night you could really see sort of him struggling on defense and him getting targeted. And that was also something that you saw against UCF. And so when it's not just one game, if it's one game, you could say, oh, it's that one game. If you remember a year ago, you and I were talking about after KU played UCF, and KU was running the two big lineup quite a bit with Flory and Hunter Dickinson, and Keyshawn Hall lit up Flory. I mean, Flory had no chance to stay with him. And you could say, oh, that's a tough matchup. That's the reason why he's getting punished. You now have two games with two teams with different sets of personnel. And one of the things that you can notice is they went into those games with the game plan of attacking Bryson Tiller. And I think Kansas needs to try and figure out, is this something that's salvageable? Can we continue to play two bigs out there and sort of weather this storm? Is it just, hey, our rotations aren't that good right now. Once the rotations are better, we'll be in a better spot. Or is it the sort of thing where you need to make a lineup change, go smaller, have Trey White at that 4 spot, have Bryson Tiller as your first big off the bench? I really do think that was something that jumped out to me for the first 35 minutes of this game. Was for the second consecutive game, you had a team really targeting KU switches defensively, really getting every shot that they wanted, and a lot of it had to do with targeting Bryson Tiller, it felt like.
Well, and when you switch 1 through 5, Kevin, that allows the opposing offense, if they really want to get the matchup on the guy they want every time, right?
Absolutely.
If you're switching 1 through 5. And so, it almost becomes a situation where KU's defense is only as strong as its weakest defender, which in this case is Bryson Tiller, because TCU, could switch to get him either in a position where he's guarding the ball or in a position where he's the one having to communicate. And as you said, the communication sometimes, whatever it may be, X, Y, Z. Again, it was a clear, as you said, a very, very clear strategy by TCU, I think, to target him. And it obviously worked out very well for them. And again, it wasn't even so much necessarily that like Tiller was the guy just constantly getting beat in like on ball defense, but it was just what it created when he was out there, where TCU was able to force other guys to move and get a lot of open threes. Like you mentioned, I mean, some practice shot jumpers for TCU at certain points in the game. The guy with the funny last name, I think Levicius, I think is how you say it, obviously was torching KU. I think he had a career high in the game. So yeah, that's certainly the biggest thing you notice, right? And so, as you said, it either comes down to a change in personnel, which means not playing Bryson Tiller or not starting Bryson Tiller with Flory or whatever it may be, or B, changing your defensive philosophy, not switching 1 through 5, not switching constantly, right? Can you switch? Can you come up with a better strategy where you're not exposing, Bryson Tiller like that or whatever it may be? So those are kind of the options, I think, for Kansas. And actually, Kevin, we did see at very, very, very little at the middle of the game, Kansas did actually switch to a zone look a couple times on a couple possessions for TCU. So that was maybe part of what they were trying to do to maybe adjust to it. And then obviously, as you said, Tiller comes out of the game and doesn't go back in. That's one thing as well. So yeah, I don't know. It honestly, it was kind of a weird game, I think, from a rotation standpoint, personnel wise for Kansas, up to the moment where the comeback started, because Jaden Dawson randomly came in after he didn't play at all against UCF, comes in for a few minutes randomly. And this one, somebody's Calderon was in, like there was some weird rotation stuff happening. And again, I think probably a lot of it had to do with the fact that maybe Self was looking for an answer to the Tiller situation. But overall, those are your options, I think, if you're Kansas, which is personnel change or philosophy change, or figure out, are you going to try to do something differently when it comes to switching constantly or whatever it may be. So that's kind of the way I see it. And something else that concerns me just beyond that is, and I think we touched on it a little bit after the UCF game too, is you don't have a lot of depth in the front court. So if Flory is in foul trouble or struggling like we saw against UCF, that basically only leaves Bryson Tiller as your other big man, right? And that leaves you kind of hamstrung, I think, because Paul Mbia is what he is, which is a guy that you hope maybe might get to contribute at some point in conference play, but I'm not going to bank on it at this point. that means it's basically those two guys. And then you saw against UCF, Summies Calderon come in and basically play that 4 spot. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where things are at right now. And I do think that opposing teams are starting to recognize like there is a lot of pressure on KU's front court, Flaherty specifically, to both A, play well and be effective, and B, not be in foul trouble either, because if he does, it kind of feels like KU's defense turns into a little bit of a house of cards at that point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't know what the answer is because it's so tough to play defense without switching a lot right now. Teams target, teams that try to play without switching. For this may be going into the weeds a little bit too much, but obviously KU fans are familiar with Porter Mosier at Oklahoma. And one of the things that Mosier always taught was he didn't want to switch. He wanted the guy to fight through the screen. The other guy could show help real quickly, but he didn't want that guy to switch. He, generally speaking, wanted the guy who was guarding the point guard to fight through the screen and continue to defend the point guard. And I think with KU, you probably want to have some element of switching. The 2022 team switched 1 through 4 and didn't switch that 5th spot. David McCormick wasn't out there defending a guard. And so is one of your answers, Flaherty is pretty switchable. You saw him last night working against guards at times. And Flaherty didn't have his best game either. But Flaherty is somebody that you can probably switch with. And so do you make Bryson Tiller basically your de facto center on defense and say, hey, hang out in this spot, or around the paint, play some form of drop coverage, and then we'll switch the guys around you. But then you're taking Flaherty potentially out of the paint where he can shot block and do those. I'm not sure what the answer is. If it's that, if it's a personnel issue, because one of the problems with going smaller, Nick, is the fact that KU's not rebounding very well. And that was one of their biggest issues last night. Again, at one point, I didn't see what it wound up being, but at one point, KU had committed more turnovers than TCU. And because of TCU's presence on the offensive glass, TCU had taken 20 more shots than KU. And you're not going to win a lot of games that way when you're giving up that many more shot attempts. And so if you go smaller, are you able to rebound the ball well enough? And so there are a lot of different questions. I don't know what the answer is. That's why Bill Self, I guess, gets paid what he does. But I do think that coming off of that game, you can't just look at it and say, oh, we won, we'll keep doing, what we've been doing. I think you're at a point now where it's 2 games in a row where your defense got targeted for the way that you're playing, and you have to figure out basically an adjustment to the adjustment.
Yeah, TCU had 43 total rebounds in the game, Kevin, 16 offensive rebounds for TCU in the game. So that's a pretty big number. And they ended up out-rebounding Kansas overall. And TCU, by the way, is statistically speaking, at least when you talk about like team-wise in terms of height, they're actually one of the shortest teams in the country.
Yeah.
When you look at their average sort of Ken Palm does the metric, it's the average standing height, which TCU is in the bottom 40 in the country in that category. So yeah, the fact that you struggled against that. Now, obviously, and look, TCU's not a bad rebounding team. I want to make that clear. The standing height thing is just sort of separate, but they're not a bad rebounding team despite that. But yeah, that is an ongoing issue that I think you're going to have to figure out. And because the other thing is, quite frankly, Bryson Tiller is going to have a role. I don't think you can just simply say, well, Bryson Tiller, he's not playable at the moment, so therefore we can't play him. I don't. That's just not really an option. Like he has to be one of the guys that's in your rotation, I think, for things to sort of make sense, especially in the front court when you consider what KU's dealing with there. So, part of it outside of everything we just discussed in terms of personnel and philosophy, everything else. Another part of it just simply is Bryson Tiller's going to have to figure it out, right? Like he's just going to have to simply individually start to let the game slow down for him again and really settle down a little bit, because I think he has to play a role regardless if Kansas wants to, reach its highest highs, which obviously we hope is a deep run in the NCAA tournament, competing for the Big 12 title and so on. So, all right, some good conversation there on the defense, Kevin. Let's shift to the offense, and we haven't really talked about Darryn Peterson yet either. So let's talk about that, some more of our takeaways, and maybe even look ahead a little bit to West Virginia this weekend. We'll do that coming up next.
Hey, what's happening, people? It is Benny Heiss, KCSN betting analyst. And while the Chiefs may not be in the playoffs, that doesn't mean there is not plenty of action to go around for the rest of you that are still crazy fans of the National Football League. And with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, it makes every playoff moment feel bigger. So whether you're looking at individual matchups in the wild card, or for a possible Super Bowl matchup, or for futures come postseason time, DraftKings has your back, and they also have your back with early exit protection. If the player in your eligible NFL prop goes down at any point in the first half, guess what? You can still get paid in cash. What an opportunity. What a way to be able to enjoy the playoffs and not worry about anybody that you include in those props going down, especially early on, and ruining the rest of all of your legs. So here's what you do. You download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use the code KCSN, that is code KCSN, to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Remember, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, wager tax pass-through may apply in Illinois. You must be 21 plus in most states, void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer.
This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in Possible, member FDIC. Thanks so much for joining us. If you haven't already, please subscribe on audio, Apple and Spotify, and you can leave us a 5-star rating and review, as well as on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We've recently surpassed 1,400 subscribers. Striving 1,500, and you can be a part of that by just simply clicking the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. You'll be notified for our YouTube live shows. You can also share a comment, join in on the conversation with other KU fans. Really appreciate you that have done that. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? All it takes is one click. All right, so despite the fact that Kansas wins the game and scores 104 points, Kevin, really, quite frankly, struggled. But they got, again, some really impressive individual performances. Darryn Peterson plays a career high in minutes, even though he doesn't end up playing in overtime. And he didn't really play too much down the stretch either. You know, he had the obviously the critical play at the end of the game where he gets fouled on the 3-point shot and makes the 3 free throws to set KU up to go to overtime, but didn't really play down the stretch. You had the broadcast with basically a Darryn Peterson injury cam. They kept showing him during the game with those heating pads on basically his thighs, quad area as well. So he ends up with 32. Melvin Council again turns it on late in the game and does his thing and makes a couple clutch shots. Scored 9 of his 18 points in the overtime period, I believe, down the stretch for Kansas. And then Trey White also with 22 points in the game as well. But what was your assessment of the game for Kansas offensively, and maybe what things look like for KU with Darryn Peterson again, sort of in and out, what Melvin Council was doing, Trey White? What was your assessment of the offense?
Yeah, the one thing I really liked offensively, I mean, Darryn Peterson obviously scoring 32 on a day where he didn't look like he was at his best, you know, from a shooting standpoint is pretty crazy. But Nick, Trey White was so aggressive while playing with Darryn Peterson. And we've been waiting for that. We've been talking about that. We've said, not specifically Trey White, but we said, hey, somebody has to step up and not stand around when Darryn Peterson is out there on the court, not wait for him to make plays. And this is one of the times that I felt like Trey White really did a great job of that. And he was that complimentary scorer you were looking for. Obviously, you would have liked to see Melvin Council be more consistent with his scoring over the course of the game. Flory, similarly, you know, Flory stepped up quite a bit in the overtime as well. But I think that when you're looking at, hey, what's a good takeaway from this game, as in like a positive takeaway, to me, it was Trey White is figuring out how to play with Darryn Peterson and was really aggressive. And I think that's a really good thing moving forward. Overall, though, to your point, you still had some of that clunkiness, right? You still had some of that, okay, Darryn Peterson's doing his thing, and other people aren't necessarily playing to their peaks and getting to their spots and doing the right stuff. And I think that's just something that's going to take time. We've talked about it here on the show. You and I feel like have talked about it on Kansas Nation as well. There's going to be an adjustment period because they haven't played with Darryn Peterson that much. He has not played with them that much. And so you're going to have a period where things are a little bit awkward, where they're trying to figure each other out. Because I know a lot of people would say, well, it's one guy adding to the lineup. Well, it's a one guy using 35% of your possessions. So when he comes in, that changes the calculus of what everybody else is doing. And I thought one of the most encouraging things offensively about this game was just the fact that we saw Darryn Peterson and Trey White coexist in a really positive way.
Yeah, I felt like at times, especially when Darryn Peterson and Melvin Council were together on the floor, Kevin, it felt like there were some possessions where those were the only two guys that touched the ball.
Yeah.
The ball kind of stuck with those two individuals and didn't, with Flaherty as he warmed into the game, I thought part of it, Kevin, was just the fact that Kansas didn't really make it much of an effort or much of an attempt really through most of the game. I felt like to even try to get Flaherty the ball. It felt like on offense in the post. Right. And so, that's something where I think Self will probably have to look at that and say, all right, we need to getting into more sets, getting into more action, because there were a lot of possessions, especially during the early portion of the game where it was more back and forth, and then TCU started to pull away, where it felt like in the half court, especially when both Darryn Peterson and Melvin Council were on the floor at the same time, those were like the only two guys touching the ball.
Yeah.
On several possessions. And so that's obviously, I think, something that needs to be addressed because, and it makes sense, right? Because you want Darryn Peterson to have the ball in his hands. And then when Darryn Peterson hasn't been playing for the majority of this season, Melvin Council has been used to having the ball in his hands. So when one of those guys gets the ball, it felt like it kind of stuck a little bit. Now, obviously with Darryn Peterson, there are moments where he's Darryn Peterson. So he just goes and scores anyways. And, you say, okay, well, I guess it's fine. But long-term, that's not a replicable recipe for success, I don't think, offensively for Kansas. And so I think you're still seeing some of that. But yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely echo everything you said about Trey White. There were moments in this game where you could see he was, actively being more aggressive, getting the ball and actively looking to attack and be a part of the offense, because there's been several other games where he's been very timid, right? And he's gotten the ball and has not been looking to shoot, has not been looking to create anything. So that was a huge positive sign. Yeah, with Flaherty, again, I would just say, for my money at least, it didn't feel like watching the game in real time that Kansas was making much of an effort to get him going offensively or to really get him the ball offensively. And so, that's where I guess I would say, okay, he wasn't very in the game, wasn't really doing a lot, but how much of that was just simply because he wasn't getting an opportunity to do anything, right? So that was where I felt like, and then eventually Flaherty did, Flaherty ends up going 6 of 7 from the floor. So the opportunities that he got, he converted on them.
Sure.
Stretch, which was really nice to see. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the answer is just as simple as, hey, it's going to take a little bit more time to start to see the offense lose some of that dysfunctionalness, that just sort of herky jerkiness of it all. If it's just as simple as, hey, they just need to keep playing together and it'll start to come together a little bit more. Or if there's, some things that maybe Katie needs to look to adjust as well. But in terms of Darryn Peterson, career high in minutes, played the majority of the game, wasn't out there as much down the stretch again due to what seemed to be the cramping issues. Had the heating pads, it looked like, on his legs at various times, and then obviously comes in and plays superhero with 5 seconds left and drawing the foul. Which, by the way, I don't understand why. So I'm not going to say, obviously I'm not a coach, but I'm not going to say that I am always 100% a proponent of fouling up 3. But Flaherty gets the ball. KU inbounds it to Flaherty, and he has the ball for a good 2 seconds on the perimeter. Foul him. If you're TCU, just foul him. I don't know why you wouldn't foul him. Instead, you let him get a chance to get it to Darryn Peterson, and then you end up with the foul on the 3-point shot that allows KU to tie the game. So I thought that was a bizarre decision from TCU. And obviously, in the moment, things happen. I'm not trying to say I don't want to be Monday morning quarterbacking it in terms of, I'm not out there, right? Like in the heat of the moment, but that seemed like a situation where TCU could have maybe won the game there if they just foul him with, 2 seconds left, foul Flory with 2 seconds left or whatever it may be. So, but yeah, it was a weird game down the stretch. And the other thing I would just say that is, I think, noteworthy is, once again, you got all the scoring. You scored 104 points. Kevin, your bench scored 7 points.
Yeah.
Your bench scored 7 points. 7 out of the 104. Now,
Jamar McDowell's 5 were big, though.
Let's say 3 of those from Jamar McDowell were huge, and then the free throws also as well.
Yeah.
So, he only scores 5 points, but they were 5 very impactful points. But yeah, you didn't really get much off the bench. Like I said, you randomly had Jaden Dawson out there. Cole Rosario played a little bit, then didn't really play at all for a majority of the remainder of the game. Again, Elmarco Jackson only 2 points, but Bill Self said it in post game that he felt that Elmarco was very critical, and there were certainly moments where he was very critical. The play, listen, he got the steals, okay, but the play where the TCU guy just dropped the ball on the inbounds. Are we going to give Elmarco credit for that steal? I mean,
you have to.
I mean, the guy just dropped the ball. He just dropped the ball. It was crazy. But yeah, so that's something else I would point out, is just the fact that you had all this scoring. Darryn Peterson did his thing. Melvin at times did his thing. Trey White was more aggressive, which was great to see. But you got basically nothing from your bench. And again, this is where I think we've had this conversation before. If you could just get one of Jaden Dawson, Cole Rosario, and Jamar McDowell ended up hitting a 3 in this game, but if you could get just one of those 3 guys to be a perimeter shooting spark off the bench on a consistent basis, that would dramatically elevate, I think, what this offense could be. And also, you may need it because it may help as well with the Bryson Tiller situation, right? If he's not able to be out there as much. So that's what I would point to with that. Again, I wouldn't recommend that Kansas play every game the rest of the season the way they played this game against TCU, where you're kind of bad and then you're good at the end of the half, and then you didn't come out of the halftime locker room, it felt like, until like 10 minutes into the second half. At one point, Kevin, I tweeted that TCU was going on a KU at Allen run at Allen. It was TCU that was doing it, that sort of vintage, like early second half, 14-2 run or whatever it may be to put a team away, except it was the inverse this time, but they didn't put Kansas fully away, which was good. So yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts on how this thing unfolded?
No, I think obviously you're thrilled to win a game like that where you didn't play as well, but at the same time you almost feel like today showing up at the office, if you're Bill Self, you're not sitting there saying, "Oh my God, we beat TCU, this is so great." You're saying there are some things that need to get fixed, need to get adjusted. And we didn't really talk that much about him, but as weird as it sounds, but Darryn Peterson playing a career high in minutes. I know a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, he took himself out." Him playing 32 minutes, his second game back, to me, that was a positive. And I think, the fact that he came back in, right at the very end to help out was a positive. He winds up with 32 points in 32 minutes. Obviously he's an incredible talent. But when Brandon Rush came back from his injury, he played in 30 or more minutes once in his first 11 games back. You don't usually go from not playing to you're playing 45 minutes in an overtime game. There's a ramping up process. And so for him to get 32 minutes and play the way that he did, even on a night where he didn't shoot as well as we've seen him shoot, I thought was an extreme positive. And you just want more of those, right? The more times that Darryn Peterson plays 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, yes, you'd like to have him for 38 or 40 minutes in a game in March. He doesn't have to be there yet. But the thing is the more he plays 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, the more you start to develop a cohesive relationship with Melvin Council, the more you start to build on top of, okay, this is where Flory wants the ball and how he's going to be a factor playing with all this. And, the more it helps with defensive rotations and all the things that go along with that. And so I do think that from a Peterson standpoint, and there was still some grumbling after the game for sure, at least online. I think from a Peterson standpoint, this is a really good step in the right direction. And, you just want to continue to see him taking those steps from here on out.
Yeah, I agree. You would have liked to see him out there at the end of the game, but the difference in this game from the UCF game, which again, if this continues, it'll just make the UCF game, I think, even more puzzling, is in this game, again, you could see, like I talked about it with what we saw from Peterson prior to conference play, when you look back like the NC State game. This game, there were moments where you could see that Darryn Peterson was fighting through cramps, right? Or fighting through whatever. Like he had the heating pads on. He asked to come out of the game at one point. He was pretty clearly limping at other moments in the game when the broadcast showed him, so he was clearly battling through it, which is a positive, I think, to see him out there, fighting through that. And you hope that he can just overcome it, and be fairly. But yeah, I mean, career high in minutes. I guess I don't really know what more you really want from him. So hopefully he just keeps stacking games where he's playing 25 plus minutes, and that allows Kansas to get more comfortable. The other one final thought here, and then I'll briefly preview West Virginia. I don't have a ton on them, but one other final thought here on this game is, Kevin, this game I think also perfectly outlines something that Bill Self has been stating openly since basically the start of the season, which is this Kansas team needs to be a defense first team.
Yes.
They're going to win more games. Yeah, they're going to win more games than not by being a defense first team than they are by trying to win with Darryn Peterson scoring 30 and Melvin Council scoring 20 on a game-to-game basis. Like this game perfectly illustrated that to me. Like this Kansas team, I think, has to be a defense first team. They have to be an effective defensive team above all else if they want to be a team that's going to be playing in late March and into April. That I think this game perfectly illustrated that, to me at least, right? You're going to have games where Darryn Peterson is going to give you 32. You're going to have games where Melvin Council is going to give you 36, like he did against NC State. Sure, that's great. Those are going to happen. But in a tournament setting, in a format where it's win or go home on a game-to-game basis, especially as you get deeper into conference play as well, this team being effective on defense is more important as a team collectively. And the last two games have been a huge step back in terms of that, in terms of Kansas being effective on defense. But last night's game, I should say, against TCU, I think perfectly illustrated that, okay, you need to be a defense first team, I think, if you really, really want to have a shot at making a deep run.
Yeah, 100%. And even if you look at the NCAA tournament, no team that I can remember hit 3-pointers for all 6 games. And this Kansas team doesn't take a ton of threes anyway. But the point is just that your shot making isn't going to travel every round. You need to win a game because you lock down defensively and hold the other team down. And this team has shown the potential to do that, and they've done it against some pretty good offenses. But right now, they're swimming, against the current from a defensive standpoint, and so they need to figure out an answer. Whether it's, hey, we need to do what we're currently doing, we just need to do it better, or it's we need to do some personnel things or not switch as often, or there needs to be some way to figure out what to do, because, like you said, if you're looking at this team and saying, how does this team get to a Final Four or have a chance to hoist a trophy at the end of the year, and they don't get there without defense. That's just a non-starter conversation. They can't do it. They aren't built to win every game, 97-93 or whatever it is. And so when you look at that, I think that's the sort of the important takeaway from this game is, great win. We've talked about this team has so much heart and fight in it. They're imperfect at times, but they don't back down and they don't quit, which is, such a huge trait to have that I think, again, I hate comparing to recent years, but like you said, either one of the last two teams probably gets in a similar situation. You're probably losing by 15 or 20. And, this is a team that battled until the final gong. And so when you when you add that part, if you're able to figure out the defensive part, that's where this team has a chance to potentially become a special team and become pretty good. And like we've said all along, Nick, one of the benefits is if you can defend really well at the end of the game, you're probably going to have a guy named Darryn Peterson with the ball in his hands. And in this case, he draws a foul, winds up making all 3 free throws, sending it to overtime. But just generally speaking, having somebody like that if you're in a 62-62 game and he's healthy in March and you can put the ball in his hands, that's where this team can kind of become a team that you feel like can make a real run in March and potentially even into April.
Kansas' next opponent will be West Virginia on Saturday afternoon. It's a road game for KU in Morgantown, a place that they've historically struggled to win in on a consistent basis. So that's what Kansas has to look forward to before a big one against Iowa State coming up next Tuesday. As for West Virginia, they defeated Cincinnati last night, 62-60. Cincinnati has been not a very good team in the Big 12. West Virginia also lost to Iowa State by 21 to open conference play. In non-conference play, they didn't really have a too tough of a schedule. They lost a close game against Clemson. That's probably their best game that they played in non-con. They had a win against Pittsburgh. That was their only top 100 KenPom win in the entirety of their non-con schedule. The other top 100 KenPom teams they lost to, which was Ohio State, Wake Forest, and Clemson. So not a great team in West Virginia. They've got Trayson Eaglestaff, who was a transfer that I think briefly some KU fans were interested in for Kansas. He was from North Dakota State, or North Dakota, not North Dakota State, just North Dakota. As a wing, they got a couple other guys, but overall, road trip for Kansas. So not going to be an easy game because it's on the road. We'll see how things shake out for KU before they have a quick turnaround and come back to Lawrence to play against Iowa State next Tuesday.
They've got Honor Huff, who is kind of a Keaton Page-ish type guy, meaning like a sub 6 foot guy that is going to launch 3 after 3 after 3. He made over 100 threes, I want to say, each of the last 2 years. He's got 60 made threes already this year, Nick. So, if you're going to switch, you have to realize that if a guy like Bryson Tiller winds up getting switched onto Honor Huff, he's going to try and pull up, get that little bit of space to pull up from 3. He's one of the guys that can keep him in it. Obviously, always tough to win in Morgantown just in general. But the other guy I wanted to mention real quick, Nick, because he's got Kansas ties, is their center, Harlan Obioha. Little piece of trivia on him. He's their 7-foot center. And, Nick, he was a 3-star offensive tackle prospect out of Hoxie, Kansas. Actually, I think he got offered by or at least took a visit to Iowa State before he decided to go ahead and stick with basketball. But, yeah, a 7-foot offensive tackle prospect from Hoxie, Kansas is the starting center for the West Virginia Mountaineers. So a little bit of trivia for those of you out there.
And he started his career in the CAA, right? I think I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
You're right, yeah.
I don't remember what the school it was, but he was in not Chattanooga, but some school like that before ending up at West Virginia. So yeah, there you go. How about that? Hoxie, Kansas, stand up! Shout out Hoxie, Kansas. And if you know where Hoxie, Kansas is on a map, you belong listening to this podcast because you're the type of person that we want on this show joining us here today. So appreciate that from Kevin. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Paid Podcast. Again, we're going to talk plenty more KU basketball. We're also going to talk plenty more KU football as well as they continue to navigate the transfer portal. Check out our preview show earlier in the week where we talked about a ton of new commits for Kansas. We're going to be talking later in the week as well about some more additional commits that KU has gotten out of the transfer portal. And then, of course, we'll be talking about KU West Virginia. And we are planning on being live next Tuesday night after KU and Iowa State because that's a big game. So we'll be live for it. Apparently, there's allegations, Kevin, that when we go live, KU loses. So
I have heard those allegations. It can't be 100% true because we've had a win or two this year.
We have
when we've done it, but our record is not looking super great. But I also think that some of that is because we first started going live a year ago, and when we started going live, KU basketball lost a lot of games, and so Yeah, and so I'm not sure there's a direct correlation there, as much as hey, KU basketball just wasn't as good last year as it has been, but there are the allegations out there, and we do have to beat the allegations that we only go live when KU is going to lose a game.
Well, we are planning on being live for that Tuesday night game after KU and Iowa State, so we'll see what happens. If KU loses that one, we may just have to shut it down. We may just have to. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.